جلسات اليوم الثاني في هذه الورشة.
The second session of the second day of this workshop, and the title of this session is the European Response to Asylum Seekers from Arab Countries. We have three specialized researchers who are going to cover this topic from different angles. I would like to start with Dr. Ahmed Hussein, who is going to talk about the European Union and irregular migration in Libya. This is going to be a study about policies and mechanisms. Dr. Ahmed Hussein, he is a researcher in the Arab Center for Policies. He has a PhD from Florence University in Italy, and also the editor-in-chief of a periodical and also he specialized in international relations. We'd like to give him 20 minutes to present his paper. Thank you very much, Dr. Marwan. I would like also to thank the distinguished guests with us here today. As it is clear in the title of this paper, so the title is European Union and Irregular Migration in Libya, Policies and Mechanisms. So this research paper is divided into three sections. The first section, I would like to talk about the development of joint European policies when it comes to regular and irregular migration. The second part of this paper is going to concentrate on the study of the reasons that have led to the transformation in Libya from a country that receives migrants into a country sending migrants into other countries. We'd like to talk about the irregular migration phenomenon and the increase of the level or number of migrants from the coastal areas of Libya. So the phenomenon of irregular migration have become a matter of public opinion that puts a lot of pressure on European governments, which is linked to so many other phenomena such as unemployment and religious extremism and so on and so forth. We have seen the leftist movements that have invested in the societal protests with regard to the economic situation, and they concentrated on migration in order to get political gains. So many populist kind of political parties in Austria, in France, and so on and so forth, so many of them have used migration in order to mobilize support, to try to mobilize fear within the electorates. And we have seen that happen at the level of cities in certain European countries and also in the different EU member states. We do find in their manifestos, in their political programs, they do call for the revisiting the common and joint policies when it comes of migration. So the different methodologies have been used. So we have two methodologies. We have seen a retreat when it comes to the demographic makeup and also the need to bridge the gap, particularly when it comes to skilled and educated migrants, and also the linkage between migration and a number of economic and security and social challenges. And the EU has developed a joint policy when it comes to migration management through a number of directives, laws, and legislations that have been adopted by the different institutions of the EU in the last 3 decades. And this has led to a number of mechanisms, financial and also military and so on and so forth. And we have seen the policies of the EU that are joint when it comes to these programs. We have seen to a number of programs vis-à-vis the Arab region, and based on which they have built good relations with authoritarian regimes in order to control borders and also to control the movement of people and also to stop the movement of individuals between the two sides of the Mediterranean Sea. And the transformation happened after the Arab Spring and the deterioration of the security and economic situation in the countries of the Arab Spring, and also the movement that we have seen in countries such as Libya. We have seen in wars and the collapse of Muammar al-Gaddafi's regime, which has led to a complete collapse of the state and its institutions. Going back to the different agreements, I have not seen any item that links migration to the work of the different institutions. So the regulation of matters such as the issuance of visa, regulation of migration has been left to the cooperation between governments, and it was left to the member states and their discretion in keeping with their own interests without having a political framework that they can resort to. So we're talking about from 1957 into the signing of the Maastricht Agreement, but in the Maastricht Agreement, migration was included as the third pillar based on which the EU was established, which is pertaining to judicial and criminal cooperation between different member states. So with the Amsterdam Agreement that was signed in 1997 and it entered into force in 1999, the competence of the Commission was expanded when it comes to legislations of migration and also asylum seeking. And also we have seen the Vienna Plan, and we have seen the different principles that have been set, that have been adopted in Tampere in Finland in 1999, and they have received or reached a number of outcomes which are considered the first pillar in establishing a new European policy when it comes to regular and irregular migration. So they concentrated on the necessity of building partnerships with the countries of origin and also mechanisms whereby they can deal with the different matters, legal matters of non-member states in the EU, and also effective cooperation between countries in the EU, and also to put 5-year plans that should be assessed every 5 years. And the first 5 years was between 1997 until 2004, 1999 to 2004, and there were a number of resolutions, directives that aimed to regulate irregular migration in those countries through looking into illegal entry and transit of countries and residence of non-European members, and also the management of irregular and illegal entry of people into the European Union, and also to look into the criminal matters. And in April 2004, also there were directives with regard to human trafficking linked to irregular migration, and also a number of programs have been allocated for return into their states of origin. Those who have found difficulties in integration, there were a number of directives at the level of the European Union. And the most important point, or the most important procedure, was after the ratification of the EU on the Dublin system. And the Dublin system was signed in 1997, but the second amended copy was in 2003. So the Dublin system entails that the asylum seeker should only present his or her request to one country, and they have shared a fingerprint system for them to know those who have entered in an irregular manner into the EU, and they have had a database established that would only become obsolete after 10 years. When I talk about the response of the EU, we're going to see how some countries have tried not to abide by this system. The second 5-year span between 2005 and 2010, which is the Hague Programme, and here, when we talk about the beginning of 2004, there was a necessity on the European Union level to establish a joint kind of methodology, particularly that we are facing a new expansion of the EU that have included countries migrants from Central and Eastern Europe, and we have seen an increase in the number of population. We have seen an expansion when it comes to land and sea borders, which entailed that they had to revisit their policies with regard to movement of persons, and a number of directives have been issued, including voluntary return for countries who irregularly reside the EU, and also there were agreements to exchange information between the different countries, and also a migration network had been established in order to update information and data between the different member states. So the third 5-year span between 2010 and 2014, which is the Stockholm program. So the Stockholm program, and due to the time constraint, I would like to talk about what had been included in terms of opportunities and challenges with regard to regular and irregular migration, and also to link between this phenomenon and integration when it comes to the Eurozone, in order to alleviate the repercussions of the flow of migrants on the job market, and also social and social security through a joint system in order to distribute migration or migrants, in order to have a kind of a quota system within the EU, and not to concentrate on one particular country when it comes to receiving migrants coming through the Mediterranean or through the land ways. So in 2012, as per the Stockholm system, they wanted to establish one asylum seeking system based on quota, based on the Dublin system, based on those legislations. They wanted by 2012 to establish this system, which is the European joint or common system. So the change that had happened is the different uprisings that have taken place in the different Arab countries, which has led to a great deal of transformation, which has led the European Union to revisit all migration policies and to reassess them, particularly with the increase of the level of migrants and number of migrants, in keeping with the amendments that they have made to the Stockholm program, and also the amendments that have been when it comes to the neighborhood policies in the EU that started in 2014. And the Commission had allocated resources into to manage the different flows of migrants, particularly from neighboring countries and particularly from Libya. And in this phase, the Frontex issued, and they asked the Italian authorities to observe and control the migrants from North Africa, particularly in Lampedusa Island, which was the destination for most migrants moving from the coastal areas of Tunisia and Libya. Europol also has used a team of experts in order to know the different criminals that might come into the European Union, and also to reinforce the European policies when it comes to irregular migration within the EU. I'd like to move to the second part, which is irregular migration in Libya. So Libya, before the 17th of February uprising, was one of the most important destinations when it comes to African workers, and this dates back to the 70s of the 20th century due to oil and the fact that Libya needed to have workers, and also this was also linked to infrastructure projects that Libya was working on. And Al-Qaddafi also, in the summit, in the African Union summit that was convened in Sirte, that had led to the establishment of the African Union, and he established the concept of African solidarity and also expressed his welcome of all the Africans. And we have seen an increase in the number of residents, and we have seen the phenomenon of irregular migration through the different coasts of Libya, and we have seen the use of rubber boats that are not that are very fragile, that used to take people to come to Libya to stay for a some certain period of time in Libya, get some amount of money to pay to those criminal networks, and then they would move to the EU and particularly to the Lampedusa island. But the Libyan authorities was able to control the movement of those criminal movements or networks and was able to serve and help the EU through the openness that al-Qaddafi was working on during that period of time. And here I would like to say that 2 years prior to the 2009 revolution, we have had 2,500,000 migrants, mostly from the sub-Saharan area and from Asian countries such as Bangladesh and the Philippines in particular. And between 2000 and 2011, we have seen 190 people that have arrived into Lampedusa, 60% of which from Libya. We have seen a great deal of transformation when it comes to irregular migration from a country receiving migrants into a country exporting migrants, if we may call it so. And this is due to the civil war and to the circumstances in Libya. And here I have carried out a number of comparisons pertaining to the number of migrants from sub-Saharan countries through the information that I have researched, and also we have seen that the figures are similar. So the average is approximately 700,000 from sub-Saharan countries and African countries from sub-Saharan countries and from Asia. And after that we have had Pakistan, Syria, Palestine, who have joined the same line in which migrants spend a very long period of time for them to be able to make it into Zuara, where there is a great deal of activity of the different human trafficking networks. And you would find them stay for some time in Fazara, and they would try to raise like 800 euros. And I have held interviews with people from Ghana. They were talking about their circumstances. Many of them would walk for long periods of time for them to be able to reach Tripoli, where they would be able to work in Tripoli for a year and a half, and they would be able to raise the amount required by those networks for them to be able to be transited into the other side of the Mediterranean. So migrants from Syria or Pakistan or Palestine who can pay larger numbers of money, larger amounts of money, such as 1,000 to 1,200 in insecure circumstances, unsafe circumstances, in boats that are not very much good for such kind of matter. So those people would be put into those boats, and the way they were treated similar to merchandise. They would be just packed into those boats for them to be able to transit into the other side of the Mediterranean. So there are so many factors, some of which I have talked about, that have led to the fact that Libya has become an exporting country of migrants, and this is due to economic circumstances, due to the irrespective of the economic circumstances in Libya. There are so many people who work in the black markets, and also we are talking about porous borders. We have 4,400 kilometers. We're talking of borders with neighboring countries such as Sudan, Chad, Egypt, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about large borders. We're talking about a huge division. We have 3 governments, and the legal government or the legitimate government is Faiz al-Sharraj's government. And irrespective of the fact that so many neighboring countries have signed memoranda of understanding and agreements, but these remains just as ink on paper. Also, we're talking about reputation. So many humanitarian and also political issues have led to what is happening. So many people, they try to compare. So many say that the security situation in Libya is very bad, but it is not as bad as my own country, such as Syria or Pakistan, and so on and so forth. they think that this is only transient before they make it to the other side of the border, where the different human trafficking networks would be able to transfer them to other countries. As for the European Union response to asylum seekers or migrants, we have had the Malta Declaration that was signed in February 2017, where the EU concentrated on its relationship with Libya by giving priority to training and also equipment to coastal patrol, and also to prepare the right circumstances for them to receive migrants. We are talking about 2014 as a result of the collapse of the situation in Syria and Iraq, and also the fact that the country collapsed into a very bad situation. So Italy had implemented the fingerprint procedure, and those migrants coming from those countries have started having a culture knowing that Italy would not give them benefits or incentives different from the Netherlands or Germany. And when they realized that they are going to those countries, those migrants were brought back to Italy, and they made the Dublin system inoperative, and those fingerprints were used only for criminal purposes. So the quota system was a kind of a qualitative kind of system. So they wanted to have people with skills and not migrants from sub-Saharan countries. So there were a number of Triton system that do use a number of patrols that do control the borders, and do not allow those boats to get closer to the coast by 30 kilometers, and also to observe the observance of the ban on weapons in the Libyan coast. And also there are some memoranda of understandings that have been signed in order to train the patrols in those areas, and also a mission was established in order to support Libyan authorities in order to develop the different borders. And here I would like to conclude. So the methodology that was used by the EU would reduce the flow of migrants, but this is only a kind of temporary solution. That is why a deep kind of strategy should be adopted in Libya in order to guarantee stability in Libya, and also to support the military and civil institutions, and to help the different authorities in order to try to get all the weapons that are in the hands of the different brigades and the different groups and factions. So all these groups, all these rules, they date back to the Gaddafi rule. So we have not seen any development when it comes to the rules, the laws and legislations that regulate irregular migration, in addition to enhancing the livelihood and the circumstances of migrants that are in the different centers, and also we have seen many of those people who have been in shelters that have died, and also we need to have a reinforcement between those institutions, and also to limit the activities of human trafficking and arms trafficking networks. We do see in Libya that there is a chaotic situation. That is why a solution, a political solution, is most likely to reduce the flow of migrants for a country not to be a transit country into a country receiving migrants.
Thank you for talking about the policies and mechanisms of the EU in response to the irregular migration coming from Libya. Next, we will speak about Syrian asylum in Germany and debate over immigration policy. Dr. Yasser Djazaerly, who works in Fitchburg University in the United States. He has a PhD in German Studies from Stanford University, and he has a long experience in teaching in a number of universities and a number of research and studies as well. You have 20 minutes. By studying the German case and comparing it to other countries, we see that the policy of refugee or asylum and integration is dependent on a number of factors, including the economic situation of the area, So you see this relationship between work and the populist extremist parties. So in Eastern Germany, we see that half of the income is what they get compared to Western Germany. Germany hosted the biggest number of refugees amongst Western countries after Angela Merkel announced in September 2015 that they will welcome those escaping war, and she encouraged the people to welcome them. Wir schaffen das, she said. Shortly after, Russia started bombing Syria, which has caused a large wave of refugees, more than 1.5 Syrian refugees that got to Germany. The German industry supported Merkel. The head of the Daimler company producing Mercedes said that they will make the basis for the coming German miracle. Thatcher links the role of migrants after World War II and the role of welcoming refugees as the German economy progresses. With World War II, Western Europe had a lack of and had a shortage of workforce. Western countries weren't able to fill this shortage by getting workforce from Eastern Europe because the Cold War had stood in their way and caused the Iron Curtain. Germany, France, and Britain had gotten workforce from Eastern Europe before the World War II. They had, after that, to rely on non-European labor force. France went to Northern Africa. The UK got them from India. Germany relied on Turkey, however, because it didn't have any colonial control. Those coming from outside of Germany were called guest workers, and in France, migrant workers. There was no integration policy back then. Everybody thought that they will return after a few years to their countries, and here lies the same difference. After more than half a century, Europe is faced with a new wave of asylum or refugees. The main factor is economic, as it was in the first wave. With World War II, or after World War II, a shortage of workforce and a low birth rate affected the industrial communities and made them willing to welcome migrants and ensure the integration to the community. A few days before Merkel had launched this famous statement, there was a German media report saying Europe needs much more than babies to avoid a demographic disaster. The 6 reporters had warned from a demographic wave that will affect Europe, and Germany has to welcome 500,000 migrants every year to prevent a drop in its population from 80 to 64 million people. This is why Sweden welcomed a large number of Syrian refugees in 2015. Before the wave of refugees, Stefan Löfven, the Swedish Prime Minister, in Brussels said that the large number of refugees is a challenge, but their presence is also a chance. If we don't do this, now we will face a big problem in the next few years. Even Japan, a conservative country, where foreigners only represent 2% of the population, in comparison 16% in France, under the industrial lobby pressure, they had to welcome foreign workers due to a drop in birth rates. Today, there are 8 million empty houses in Japan because their owners are dead and no new generation has inherited them. In China, it dropped the policy of the unique child, and there are a lot of writings on the negative impact of migration on identity. A lot is being focused on migration. Foreign Affairs magazine spoke this month about migration. Charles Kenny looks at it differently and says, the problem is not the refugees or the migrants to Europe, but rather the low number thereof. Zachary Caraba, in his report, A Demographic Bankruptcy, he said that the 21st century will witness the end of the demographic growth that we've seen in the last 100 years, which means we should rethink capitalism that is based on more production for more people. But this demographic drop is not enough for a country to open its gates to migrants. We have 6% birth rate in Germany, 1.3% in Italy. So Italy needs more migrants than Germany. Despite that, Italy has become the most aggressive and the most hostile to migrants. The difference with Germany is not only the birth rate, but the economic performance. Germany has the biggest economy in Europe, while Italy is at the lowest part of the scale. 110% is the economic Carlo Cottarelli, an Italian economic expert, considers that the low birth rate is part of the reasons for the economic slowdown. Other causes are bureaucracy, corruption, difficulty adapting to the euro. He presents many ideas as solutions, but says that the low birth rate as a problem can only be resolved through migration. But how to do that when you have a 9.9% of unemployment rate? Migrants may come to Italy, but its weak economy means they will not find a job. It will be difficult for them to integrate into society, therefore. Labor and work plays a big role in integration, according to many research. McKinsey considers that work is at the highest level of integration, as a priority, that is. Jean Jaurès and Friedrich Ebert, both from France and Germany, conducted a search end of 2017 and focused on the importance of work and labor, along with education, accommodation, and others. Alexander Betz and Paul Lawyer, who worked as advisors with the Jordanian king regarding the Syrian refugee crisis, that independence is most important and autonomy is most important for refugees, and only through work can they achieve that. On the other hand, There was a report in Germany by a number of institutions. They considered that education is key to integration, along with education, labor market, social integration, the viewpoint of the population, and facing the crimes against refugees and aggression against them. Indicators show that the German market is gradually succeeding to integrate the refugees. 7% only got jobs at the beginning, but in October 2019, it had risen to 40%. Metan Bosa, working in the Bavarian Economic Union, says that integrating migrants in the labor force is happening better than expected in 2015. He says that the challenges were ignorance of the language and no facilities to help integrate them, as well as the political controversy around political debate around migrants. Another person adds that they find a job almost a year faster than the Yugoslavian migrants that came to Germany before. However, a new study of a sample of 500 female and male students showed that 60% only succeed after 500 years of language studies to pass the average test required to enter the labor market. There was another book called Deutscher Chapsinak, German Destroys Itself, and this became a bestseller book, as well as another book by the same author, How Islam Stands Against Progress and Threatens the Society. The first book says that Arab and Muslim migrants are a burden to Germany because they travel there to use its social health care and social security system. He said that they don't like to study, and he supports that with figures. Djazaerly compares between the performance of regular migrants and Muslim migrants, and he says that it's Islam that stands in the way of their educational attainment. To focus on religion and culture, he pretends that the situation of Arab and Muslim migrants that impoverish Germany is different than the situation of migrants from, or in the United States that came from Latin America, and he said that they enrich the U.S. Community. Djazaerly shows the difference between the migration of Muslims to Germany and the migration of Latin America to the U.S. He is too biased and too racist to notice the commonalities. Samuel Huntington considers that the Latin American culture is outside of the Western world, even as opposed to the Western world's culture. Now, the main idea of the second book is that migration from Latin America is a threat to the U.S. and its culture. This is what Djazaerly said about the Muslim migration to Germany. Ann Coulter, a female lawyer, had another book in 2015 to criticize the Latin American migration to the US. Donald Trump has used the main points of this book during his campaign. Despite all this, there's one major difference between the anti-migration rhetoric in Germany and that in the US. Some Arab migrants nurture this, while we didn't see that from Latin Americans or Spaniards. Bassam Tibi, who is a professor of international relations in a famous German university, also stood against Islam after this started as a move after the terrorist attacks in Europe. He wrote a book, Muslim Migration, The Failure of Integration. TB right now is doing the same again, and he is riding the wave of hysteria caused by the aggression, sexual aggression, that some say were caused by Muslims in New Year, as well as after the Tunisian person's attack on a Christmas market. He published a book and he speaks about the new Germans, specifically the migrants, specifically the Syrians, that carry their hatred to Jews and that cause a new wave of anti-Semitism. Hamid Abdel and Ahmed Mansour joined this wave, and these books are very popular. They are a tool used by the far-right parties against migration and migrants. But this adds to racism. He speaks about the Islamic world, entitled The Crisis of Modern Islam. Focusing on the natural factor is a key point of Bernard Lewis's approach. This rhetoric started before Lewis, but he had promoted it greatly, especially in his book on the confrontation between Islam and modernity. After the 2001 attacks, Lewis says that the basis for the crisis in Arab and Muslim communities is the incapability of Islam to cooperate or to cope with modernity. TB and Lewis had a lot of commonalities, and this is not by coincidence. Both worked with Fuad Ajami, the Lebanese thinker, and they founded a foundation. With the migration of many people from the Middle East to Europe, the incapability of the Middle Eastern countries and societies to adapt to modernity was reflected in a lack of integration by the Arab migrants in Europe. Members of the other party are now using statements such as, we asked for migrant workers and we got the scum of the earth and we will kick them out. First, the person who said that was unable to get a seat in the parliament in Germany, but he got one in the European Parliament. Now we ask, would this economy continue succeeding in integrating migrants while there's an economic slowdown to a growth of 0.5% and 0.1% in the third trimester in 2010?
Thank you very much, Dr. Yasser. You talked about the different procedures when it comes to asylum seeking by Syrians. And you talked about the non-European programs of cooperation. Talked also about many other issues. So we're going to have Mr. Mounir Mebarkia. He's going to talk about a decentralized European Arab cooperation programs as a response mechanism for forced migration. So Mr. Mounir Mebarkia, he is leading research in a number of projects. So you have 20 minutes for your intervention. Microphone, please. The microphone is too far away from the speaker. We kindly ask him to speak closer to the microphone. We kindly ask him to speak closer to the microphone. The response of the European side this time was not in keeping with the traditional methodologies of dealing with migration that the region knew in the SABIC in the past. So this response was based on the containment of migrants, refugees in the neighboring countries, and also to seek the support of the different players, such as the different municipalities, in order to regulate the matter. So the response is going to be through the study of a number of decentralized cooperation programs by non-governmental entities through seeking the support of local entities in order to work on this matter. So this study did not include all programs, but through a model program which is entitled Refugees and Host Communities that was carried out by a center under the supervision of a number of players. So the problematic when it comes to this study lies in the fact that there are a number of asylum seeking cases that were very much large and were not in keeping with prior cases that used to be dealt with by central governments and so on and so forth. So with the different crises that have happened in different countries, the different local authorities in neighboring countries, particularly neighboring to Syria, such as Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, and so on and so forth. So the local authorities tried to look into this matter. So there were a number of professors that have been discussing these matters. So we have had a professor from Iraq who talked about the fact that the government ignored this matter and that local authorities and agencies that dealt with this matter So this matter has led to so many reservations with regard to the local authorities because all these splintered efforts do happen but do become inimical to its developmental kind of plans and also leads to the collapse of the so many services that are presented such as health and education. So that is why so many Arab parties and European parties started betting on the role that is played by local authorities in order to framework this European response in the form of a cooperation and for them to be able to control the cooperation between the different partners in order for it to be able to continue with the services that they do require and for refugees and other entities as well. So this is the program that I would like to talk about, and this is part and parcel of the integration option. So we're not talking about an identity integration, at least we talk about a limited number or a basic level of integration in order to contain those refugees into their territories to be integrated in the host countries. So this presentation includes four main themes. The first theme where we try to justify why this methodology in particular, why a decentralized system when it comes to this crisis that is happening. So what would lead to this kind of cooperation? What would these decentralized programs cater for when it comes to migration? So we have come up with a definition of this program, how it sets the concerns of migrants, refugees, and the host communities as for the first theme, in which we're going to talk about the reason why this methodology that was adopted, this new methodology when it comes to dealing with migration crises. There are three main transformations that have happened with regard to migration. The first one is the transformation when it comes to dealing with cases of migration. So we have a transformation when it comes to the different direct services that are normally given to refugees into a developmental kind of project by creating long-term projects that refugees and the host communities would be benefiting from. So this transformation happened in the transition from a centralized system into a multifaceted system that would lead to all relevant entities being able to benefit from the program. In addition to the transformation, which is the continuous recognition of the community role when it comes to migration and the governing of this system. So another factor that has led to that also is the particularities of this phenomenon of asylum seeking. There are some particular traits that used to exist, and there are some new traits, and we have concentrated on two main particularities. The first one is the urban nature of asylum seeking, which means that refugees are no longer heading or seeking faraway areas or camps. On the contrary, they seek to settle in urban areas and try to integrate with the local community. So this is a kind of movement that is supported internationally and also by the national authorities. We talked about the situation in Lebanon that had adopted the no camp policy, so it had encouraged that camps should not be used because they lead to the loss of generations, it leads to the loss of human capital, and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of an international kind of trend in order to preserve the asylum seeking system and also to get rid of anything that would be destructive to this generation. So we have seen that asylum seeking has become an extended or an expanded kind of phenomenon that extends to 20-25 years. So that is why we cannot adopt traditional kind of methodologies through NGOs or through giving direct aid and support to refugees. If a refugee is going to stay for 10 to 20 years in the host country, so the most feasible methodology is that those governments, those city authorities should be supported for them to reinforce their services in order to contain those refugees for a large period of time up until other alternative solutions are found and voluntary return is guaranteed after the stability of their countries of origin. So this kind of trend was supported, agreed with, particularly when it comes to regular and secure migration, and also the international agreements that there should be cooperation with the different local authorities and no direct aid should be given to the refugees unless it should take place through the different local authorities. So So there was a review of the two agreements, and there was mention of the role played by local authorities. So when we try to adopt this methodology, what do these programs give us for the different host communities? So the main idea that we'd like to talk about, so the international support does not target refugees directly, but only through the support of the different local communities. So the aid and support is going to be given to the local communities for them to frame or set a framework of support to those refugees. So these programs, whether these are governmental or non-governmental, so there should be a regulation of the different interventions through a comprehensive program that would set the role that is going to be played by each and every contributor, and also taking into account the different complaints and grievances that are given by the local communities that say that the international organizations, they interfere indiscriminately. So also we have to build capital, the local capital, and the capacity building, particularly when it comes to dealing with refugees. So this is a very sensitive matter from a psychological and legal perspective in terms of rights, authorities, and integration. So all these entails that capacity building should be part and parcel of this effort. So this is a new phenomenon that people are not used to. So those local communities were used to giving services to their own citizens, but now in the face of these large waves of migrants or refugees, this entails an international support for capacity building. So this decentralized cooperation entails also an exchange of experiences and expertise, and also the European partners such as the Italian and German and French partners have a large experience when it comes to dealing with refugees. So this would enable those local communities to start in the right way for them not to be facing negative repercussions that might arise as a result of the efforts exerted. The same thing, this will lead into a transformation into a developmental kind of methodology in order to give a kind of a local trade to these kind of efforts, international efforts, and also as part of the local policies, we can work on that. So these are the most important contributions that we can come up with. So they might look like they are very simple and not very important, but when we look into them, they are very important indeed, especially with the protracted cases of migration or asylum seeking. The third theme, we talked about the concerns and needs of Arab countries that host refugees. So that is why it was necessary to understand and study what these cities need for them to be able to contain refugees and to deal with them for a large period of time. So this is a very complex matter. That is why we sought a number of studies that have been carried out by specialist organizations in Jordan and Lebanon that have looked into a number of concerns, and they have had opinion polls that have been carried out to understand the needs of refugees. The most important things that have been specified and indicated is that they need capacity building as to how to deal with these institutions, how to deal with these situations, and try to have additional sustainable funding, taking into account that there are so many financial issues that they might face. That is why we needed to have a sustainable source of funding that would meet the needs and requirements of refugees in the medium term. That is why we needed to have coordination between the different actors, in addition to have data about refugees due to the urban nature of their life. So getting statistics about refugees, IDPs, and asylum seekers has become very, very difficult indeed. That is why we needed to have the help of local communities, NGOs, in order to gather such data and information. And this can only be achieved through decentralized initiatives of cooperation. In the fourth theme, after we talked about the kind of contributions through these programs, we talked about the basic needs of these cities for them to be able to contain these phenomena and to be able to deal with in the long term. So we have set a model program in the Mediterranean area, which is a regional program dedicated to 5 countries in the Middle East and Turkey: Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, Palestine. These are the largest countries in terms of the number of refugees that are being hosted by them. So many of them have large numbers of refugees. So this was carried out by the center, which is a network that includes a number of actors that would include the IMO and the French Development Agency, the German Development Agency. All of them have taken part in this comprehensive program that aim to reinforce the capabilities of the local communities in terms of the containment of refugees. So this program has given qualitative aid and support in order to enable and empower the local communities, and the most important efforts were based on the needs and requirements that have been set. When it comes to the support, this program has established the municipality system of learning that would include so many municipalities from the 5 countries to share experiences and expertise about what is happening and how to deal with refugees from economic, social, and political perspectives. So this network convenes meetings, networks, training programs, and also it supports joint projects aiming to reinforce the development of those countries, aiming to help the host communities in order to reduce the impact of this image that people tend to have about these host communities. So there is another contribution, which is the rationalization of additional funding when it comes to dealing with the matters of refugees. So there were a number of conferences that have been convened in order to pledge aid to Syrian refugees in Jordan and other countries, and this had led to the establishment of the Syrian Business Association that tries to help so many refugees in Jordan in particular and Lebanon. So this project contributed in gathering data about refugees through the platform that was established, through the database that was established on their website. This database includes the number of refugees, their activities, their place of residence, and this would enable the relevant people to review these pieces of information and to deal with those refugees in different parts of the world. And in order to alleviate concerns about integration and also societal conflicts or problems that might arise, experts in this program have carried out studies about the positive impact of the presence of Syrian refugees from a political and social perspective. So this study is available in different languages. Within the same framework, this program has helped the different municipalities on how to deal with refugees. Yesterday we talked about the different governments of different states that they did not want to recognize the fact that they have to be held accountable for and the fact that when they evaded their duties, they left the ball in the court of the municipals or the municipalities or the local municipalities. Also, we have seen a trend whereby so many decentralized systems are taking over, and a new trend, which is the centralized system, trying to regain its power in order to reinforce coordination between the different entities, and also to get rid of the old systems of migration or refugee camps. Such programs were able to enable the different relevant entities to exchange expertise and experiences, particularly in the Arab region, in matters such as decentralization and management of matters of migration, because those municipalities do not have official power by the law, but they have a kind of a de facto kind of authority to do so due to the circumstances. So, to adopt these policies, particularly when it comes to integration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mounir, for this excellent presentation on non-governmental Euro-Arab program. I have 15 minutes. I will open the floor for questions. Thank you so much for introducing me. My question is Dr. Yasser, if you allow me. Angela Merkel bet on the presence of Syrian refugees since the beginning of the Syrian crisis, and she was right. The last statistic for the Berlin Institute in assessing migration and integration of Syrians shows that they succeeded in integrating. More than 370 refugees work against a salary, so more than a third of the refugees. But we don't understand this contradiction between the parliament and the Bundeshaus. Especially the German parliament said that this is a lecture. We need a question. Why this contradiction with the Angela Merkel policy? Thank you.
When national interests entail that we have to have other policies, when we have people coming from the Balkans, we have seen a decrease in the number of refugees in the Netherlands. It is a matter of a political decision. Thank you. Before the elections of the European Parliament, there were meetings in Italy. I think who is one of the most extremist radicals or most radical extremists in Hungary and other countries
I think the main fear is cultural. Yes, there is xenophobia and there is Islamophobia. So there is a fear of cultural threats. I think the fear of this inverted pyramid can be solved with the use of robots and technologies. So now the fear is that it may replace humans. In the UK, for example, they are thinking of imposing taxes on robots. I don't know if you agree with me.
Hi, this is a question for Mr. Ahmed. I was on board the Ocean Viking last week. It's a migrant rescue ship in the Mediterranean rescuing migrants leaving Libya. So I spoke to a lot of people from Ivory Coast, from Ghana, from Cameroon, from DRC, from CAR stuff, and they spoke about the conditions in Libya, the detention centers, the complete lawlessness that's taking place in Libya. You talked about having a political solution to the migration crisis, the migrants leaving Libya. We've seen so many agreements, we've seen so many discussions, talks, as recent as July, I think, when 7 EU countries agreed to take in migrants. But we still see there's so many delays, we still see there's so many pushbacks from all these countries, and there's not a solution. So if you can just elaborate on what kind of political solution you see and you envisage to solve the problems facing right
Thank
now.
you.
To answer the first question on the contradiction between the parliament and Merkel, Sergei Prados has conducted a research to show that parties are changing their rhetoric with the change of the trend amongst the voters. For Merkel, she will not be a candidate to once again for a premiership, and this is global. We even see it in the United States. Those who want to return for another mandate, they will definitely follow what this guy is saying. This means that they will try to have a rhetoric that is in line with what the people want. Otherwise, they will lose the elections. So the professor of political sciences criticizes that, and he asks the researchers to be more open, and he asks them to present a different cultural rhetoric than what the far right is presenting. Now, from an economic perspective, the issue is much bigger than this. When the number of population goes down, the whole economy will suffer. There will not be any houses built. Anybody working in house building will suffer, especially in the United States. Those who expect that China will go through whatever Japan has gone through, a big rise and then stagnation. The big difference between Japan and China is the size of the internal market in China. And this is what the US economic policy is premised on. So this is a very, very complicated issue regarding the country's economy. Thank you for your questions. Dr. Hashim, I agree with you. But when I mentioned Amsterdam after Maastricht, I wanted to speak about the historical development of this policy, but the EU is still in this trouble. the European state was unable to control the borders, especially when we speak about the Schengen space, free movement of people. So there was a need for integration, cooperation amongst them. Now, the increased flow of refugees and migrants was a real crisis. This is how contradiction started between what is national and what is joint cooperation at a European level. Now, for the second question. Of course, there's a diplomacy of conferences on Libya, of informal migration from Libyan coast. Now, for the solutions, we cannot talk about humanitarian crises in Libya without speaking about the point of start, which is the explosion of the political situation in Libya, the direct military intervention hitting the political regime, the fall of Gaddafi regime, and the withdrawal that followed by the different countries that interfered. There was no support, and now here I'm not asking for a military intervention and a continuous intervention. But at the same time, no support was given to the government, and we are facing a jungle of weapons. Therefore, finding solutions to ending human trafficking goes through a political approach at a regional level. The neighboring countries should truly want to solve this issue, as well as an international intervention while supporting one government, a legal, legitimate government that can rebuild the institutions that that can use force, such as the police, the army, and this will reduce the flow of migrants. Thank you so much. At the end of this session, I would like to thank the panelists, Dr. Yasser, Dr. Ahmed, and Dr. Mounir. We now have a lunch break, and then we will resume. Thank you.